out of 10 Filipinos believe that fake news is a problem in the country, according to the latest Pulse Asia survey. More than half of them believe that social media influencers and vloggers are to be blamed for the spread of misinformation.
Sabi ng isang eksperto, kahit na i-fact check ang mga fake news, hindi raw ito matitigil hanggat walang parusa sa mga nagpapakalat ng maling impormasyon.
Sa totoo lang, nag-i-improve yung teknolohiya. Maganda sana siya para sa maraming tao, pero nagagamit rin siya at nawe-weaponize din siya ng mga nagpapakalat ng peking balita. Ngayon, posible na yung deepfake. Dati, image manipulation lang yung posible, pero ngayon, kahit video manipulation ang gagawa na. At kahit yung image manipulation software, masyado nang sophisticated.
The Office of the Press Secretary is drawing up programs to address fake news. The Office of the Press Secretary calls it a serious concern, and 86% of Filipinos agree, according to a new survey. What should the country's campaign against disinformation look like? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Roby Alampay. Kasama ko po online, Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. She's joining us from the port area in Manila. Ami, good evening.
Good evening.
IMF is projecting that the worst is yet to come. They're calling it most likely a global recession in 2023.
Not very good, ano? Pero at least yung mga barangay and sangguniang kabataan officials, maligaya sila. They got another extension.
Oo nga. Pinag-uusapan na natin yan ng ilang linggo na natin pinag-uusapan yan. The COMELEC saying wala naman necessarily masasayang, although the exercise medyo nakakapanghinayang din dahil pang ilan na to, pangatlong extension na yata to for this particular elections.
It will be costlier, di ba? Sinabi naman ng COMELEC. Kung October or December, mas mahal siya.
And in the meantime, ano pang mga binabantayan yung balita?
Well, medyo bumabagal daw. Well, it's related to our first guest. Medyo bumabagal daw yung positivity rate. And of course, nangako nga yung OPS. Sinabi nga dyan sa introduction na ayusin daw nila, they are going to confront fake news. Ewan ko how they're going to do that, no? It will be a discussion later.
Maduguyang usapan na yan, masalimuot, and it's gonna take a lot of stakeholders taking part in that conversation. But as you pointed out, we'll start off with a situationer still on COVID, and we will speak to our first guest after a short break. Keep it right here on One News. Right.
1 minute po.
The health department says that COVID-19 cases in Metro Manila and other parts of Luzon have started to plateau. The DOH is now monitoring case trends and hospital admissions in the Visayas and Mindanao to form a basis for the recommendation of the lifting of the COVID-19 state of calamity.
The Health Department warns that the country's daily COVID-19 infections could reach 8,000 by the end of October. The agency says compliance to health standards continues to decline.
Aside from yung Omicron BA.5, there are new subvariants. Hindi tayo sure kung nakapasok na itong mga iba dito, like yung BA.4.6, yung BF.7. So marami ng mga bagong subvariants that could be affecting the trend.
The latest COVID-19 bulletin suggests a drop in cases nationwide. In Metro Manila, the Health Department says infections are plateauing. Are we near the endemic phase? We ask infectious disease expert Dr. Ronchi Solante. He's joining us via Zoom. Welcome back, the Chiefs, Dr. Solante.
Good evening.
Hi, Roby. Good evening.
So, sir, what might it mean when we say that infections seem to be plateauing?
One of the main reasons there is that for the past weeks, I think if you look at the data globally, cases are already trending down. So which means that the number of the cases for the past week is stable. Walang significant increase, although wala ding significant na decrease. But it's downtrending to the point na mukhang nagiging stable na siya dahil nga hindi na gaano kataas ang nakikita natin. And more importantly dito, Roby, yung tinatawag natin na the healthcare utilization rate continue to be stable, less than 50% for almost 2 to 3 months na yan. So dito natin babasihan kung are we able to manage the infection? Is it already controlled? Most likely we're already on the brink of that. And we need to strengthen pa rin yung mga health protocol natin at saka yung vaccination natin.
So, Doc, because usually we always ask, di ba, pagka nagpa-plateau or whatever the trend is, kung factored in na yung all the people who may be infected but are not getting tests anymore. But what you're saying is that doesn't even matter. The more important number, as you've been saying all along, is healthcare utilization kasi yun, walang taguan doon.
Yes, obviously, and when you say endemic, nandito pa rin yung virus, but not enough to disrupt our livelihood, not to disrupt our mobility, at kaya na nating, we can control, it's in our hands now kung paano natin, saan ba tayong path pupunta? Doon ba tayo sa pataas na kaso or magiging stable or pababa, And paano natin makontrol to? By really observing pa rin the health protocol at sana mataas ang vaccination. But I think one of the important reasons when you talk about indemnicity is the immunity of the population. It's not only about the vaccine. When you see a lot of people being infected with Omicron since January, February, March, meron na rin itong hybrid immunity, ang population wall of immunity natin. Vaccine plus the natural immunity. And the most important determinant of saying endemicity will be the reproduction number. If the reproduction number continue to be less than 1, then doon natin makikita na this is stable and there is already a possibility na hindi na ito tataas na nakita natin with Delta and Alpha last year.
Doctor, meron bang period for monitoring yan if we are actually nearing endemicity? Kasi at this point, bumabagal na nga yung vaccination natin and you are saying yung natural immunity nagwa-wane din yan. Ano yung period of monitoring ninyo para malaman nga kung medyo safe na nga talaga tayo?
Well, it's so difficult to look at that particular timeline, because unang-una, alam naman natin na itong virus na to, lahat ng immunity that we develop will also wane. So ang protection mag-wane din, So expected yan, kung meron mang pataas na kaso, merong mga low peaks, Pero hindi na ko na nakikita yung mga tag 20,000, 25,000 na kaso na we would expect with a variant of concern that is very highly transmissible. Kasi nga, because of the population immunity na mukhang nakatulong din yung natural immunity at this point in time. And if you look at how we are behaving now, we are like behaving in a pre-pandemic time. Lahat lumalabas. The transportation, 100%. May mga klase na. May mga 100% na ang occupancy sa mall. No? So I think even with that particular event, hindi ganun kataas ang kaso. So that only means na medyo mataas-taas na rin ang immunity natin.
Pero anong risk should we watch out for? Kasi marami ko nakikitang stories ngayon about long COVID, ano? Hindi lang sa mga vulnerable na, pero of course, particularly among the elderly, pero among the people with halimbawa mga bata pa, pero may mga asthma siguro.
Yes.
In fact, I know people na mga bata pa na complaining about long COVID several months na, chronic fatigue, no? Anong danger na? How high is the risk for that?
So that's why our messaging here is always we should be careful, no? Because unlike other infections like flu, ang flu walang long COVID. So on the other side, we want to protect the vulnerable population from getting the severe infection, but we also want to protect a certain group of the population from getting the long COVID, especially among the younger population. No? But long COVID may not be a cause of concern among the younger population. It is more of a concern among the vulnerable population. So when you look at that aspect of when we move on, endemicity na tayo, but we still have to be careful because the vulnerable population will be something that we need to monitor. But I don't think it will be something also that will be a significant increase in the mortality with this age group. Talagang meron yan na stable ang mortality niyan, hindi ganun kataas, but there is still the prospect na may mga mapunta sa ICU, may mapupunta sa mga hospital because of that complications.
But Doc, speaking of endemicity, we had been talking about this and it had been mentioned many times in the past, di ba? Na, look at the flu, look at the common flu, di ba? That, maraming tao get that and then it doesn't disrupt our health systems anymore. When we talk about endemicity, people think that, okay, siguro dun papunta, or that's what we're hoping to see. But how far are we? If you take the common flu as something that people are familiar with, how far away are we still from envisioning or claiming that kind of a situation for COVID?
Well, ganito yan, Roby, no? Ang problema sa flu, we don't have a very good extensive surveillance system. Tapos, kung titignan mo yung data sa WHO, almost 1 billion a year and 650,000 ang death ng flu. No? That's the average. So, kung that big is, parang nandito ka na rin sa COVID. It's just that ang COVID, nabomonitor natin because of the very good surveillance, because of the testing. Ang flu, hindi natin nagagawa yan. No? So, ganito na lang ang titignan natin. Flu can have the symptoms of upper respiratory tract, mild symptoms. COVID also have the same symptoms. Flu can also affect vulnerable population and it can cause severe infection like pneumonia. That is also the same with COVID. The only difference there is that COVID has what we call the long COVID, which flu doesn't have. So ito yung mga babantayan lang natin, and I don't think this will be enough to cause alarm. It's just that physician, doctors should always tell their patients, mahirap ang magka-long COVID dahil long-term ang complication yan. But if you can endure that long-term ng mga complication, then that's okay, no? Pero that will not be okay for the 65 years old or for the 70 years old. So that should be our messaging, that when we look at endemicity, there will always be a population that will be high risk for severe and the long COVID.
Okay, now Doc, what about variants, sub-variants? How concerned should we be for a potential new thing that could be a game changer again?
Yes, that's the difference with the flu. Because of the ability of this virus to mutate. And we don't know yet that if after 2 or 3 months with this Omicron, another subvariant or a variant of concern different from the Omicron will emerge, no? Because what are we seeing now? Kung makikita mo itong mga variant of concern, they develop away from the lineage. No? Ibig sabihin, hindi sila develop coming from an alpha, coming from a delta. They develop separately. No? So that's one thing na kailangan nating i-monitor, and that's why para ma-lessen ito mga variants of concern, paigtingin pa rin natin ang protection, including vaccination. Now, if there's a need to give the vaccine every year para lang ma-control natin ang transmission, then that would be helpful in terms of controlling also the emergence of the variants of concern.
Paano yung next generation vaccines, yung bivalent, no? In-order na daw ng Department of Health. Di ba Omicron specific siya? Will it also deal with the Omicron subvariants?
Yes, that's a good step, no, for the Department of Health, no, because what we are looking now, if we will be putting the Omicron variant specific booster, it's so specific against that Omicron variant, and it can also have most likely cross protection with an Omicron subvariant, whether it's B1, B2, B3, B4, and B5. Now, the other advantage of this bivalent vaccine is that it's broadly it produces a broadly neutralizing antibody. Kumbaga, marami siyang antibody na produce to the point na expert predict mas longer ang protection nito, like more than 8 months because of that broad neutralizing antibody production.
Yung endemicity, Doc, by way of explaining lang to people, no, tinatanong ano ba yung kapag humina na, humihina ba siya yung infection na we will reach a point na para na lang siyang common cold? Ganon na lang siya? Ganon ba yun?
Yes, I mean, no, so paliwanag ko lang, endemicity is mababa ang kaso pero hindi nawawala. Nandun pa rin ang mga tao na pwedeng magka-infection, but majority are mild, but there will still be population na mag-develop pa rin ng severe. But comparing with pandemic, yung hawaan hindi na ganun kataas kumpara sa pandemic and when you compare it with endemicity.
Okay.
Saka yung mga simptomas niya, hindi na ganun ka-severe. Ganun ba yun?
Yes. Dalawa ang definition sa cause ng severity ng symptoms with COVID, I believe. One is the inherent viral virus na hindi na siya ganun katapang. And I think the Omicron is that virus na hindi na siya ganun katapang kumpara nung Delta. No? So inherently, it can cause the infection, pero majority will only have the mild symptoms. Pangalawa, what causes that mild symptoms? On the other hand, it's because a lot of us are already vaccinated or having the natural immunity. And that protects us also from getting the severe infection. So dalawang factor yan. Mahina na virus, at the same time, dagdagan mo na meron protection ang population. And that's why we look at it at that way na bababa ang transmission natin.
In the meantime, Doc, kumusta naman po ang supply natin across all kinds of the complete arsenal? Not just vaccines, but medical treatments that are now available. Kamusta po ang access natin, and for that matter, kamusta ang affordability?
That's the problem, Roby. No? That's a reality. Because even if you say molnupiravir is available and can help us prevent severe infection, pero binibili ng pasyente yan wala namang ganung libre, no? And the cost range from 3,000 to 5,000, depende kung saan mo binibili. Now, the other one, yung sinasabi natin na Paxlovid, no? I think I've heard ang price, pinakamura niyan is between 10 to 15,000. So these are drugs that are available, but it's not so accessible because of the price. Even remdesivir is still a high price, 3,000, 4,000 per vial. Not everyone can afford it, no? So it's importante na kung mag-allocate man ang government to move into endemicity, there should be also allocation for this antiviral, especially for the indigent population.
But Doc, what's keeping economies of scale from finally just catching up? I mean, is it still a manufacturing limitation for these drugs?
It's not the manufacturing limitation. It's more of that these drugs are still in the EUA. So which means kung mag-apply na itong mga company ito ng CPR, so baka mapababaan yung mga presyo nito. No? So, I mean, we need to have more access, and I think the government should really come in to regulate the prices of the mga antiviral drugs. Ang problema lang, these are patent drugs na sa mga pharmaceutical industry, may mga talagang limitations to that, no? Kasi patent pa sila, wala pa mga generic.
Pero akala
so
ko,
yung
Doc,
price na mataas,
just to clarify,
Sige.
akala ko may generics na. Akala ko these pharmaceuticals had given license for generics to be produced.
yes, that's for excuse me, that's for remdesivir and molnupiravir, no?
Yeah.
But siguro kung titingnan natin, maski sabihin mo pang may generic yan, yung distribution process niyan at saka yung process of getting it from other country, na ipatong pa rin yan sa mga gamot na to. Kaya medyo talagang mataas-taas pa rin ang presyo. But I don't think these prices are really going down because maski sabihin mo pang generic yan, meron pa rin mini-maintain yan yung mga the pharma industry to just maintain the production of these drugs. Kasi hindi naman to mga drugs na ordinaryo lang. These are innovative drugs na kailangan talagang mataas ang cost ng production.
Well, in the meantime, Doc, naghahanda na tayo for All Souls and All Saints Day. And several local government units have said na papayagan na daw nilang pumunta ang mga tao sa mga sementeryo. Kaya na ba natin mag-undas na pre-pandemic style?
Well, at this point, nakikita ko ngayon, parang pre-pandemic na tayo, no? Ang dami ng nag-gatherings, no? Kaya ang ano na lang talaga natin na kung gagawin naman to ng LGUs, parang back to normal na tayo. But our behavior should not be back to normal. Nandun pa rin yung health protocol natin, pagsuot ng face mask, no? Maghugas ng kamay. And everything should be in order. Dapat protektahan pa rin natin ang mga vulnerable population. Pag may mga sintomas, you have to inform them if they are the vulnerable population, consult the doctor para lang at least early on mabigyan ng intervention para hindi maging severe ang COVID nila.
Anong gusto niyong makitang mga services or facilities sa sementeryo? Kung sakasakali, kasi medyo magulo na yan sasabihin outdoor yan pero there's also a rule na kung maraming tao dapat nakamask pa rin, di ba? Ano yung mga gusto niyong measures in place kung sakasakali?
Alam mo, Ami, kung ako lang ang masunod, I will do health screening pa rin, no? Sa symptom screening pa rin sa sementeryo. Kung pwede lang, no? Kaya lang, that's so tough, no? For the local government unit, no? Kasi alam mo, pag meron kang symptom screening, malaking bagay yan na pag meron kang symptoms, huwag ka mo nang pupunta sa sementeryo. Pag nagpupumilit ka, patingnan mo yung mga temperature nila doon, i-check pa rin, then mas maganda yon kasi at least kung may lagnat na makita pa lang doon bago papasok, at least less of the transmission na yan sa loob. Kasi pag nandun ka na sa loob, hindi mo na makontrol yan. Talagang kakain yan doon, mayroon yung mga gagawin na magtatanggal ng mask, and of course, the social distance or physical distance definitely will not be observed at that point.
Doc, final question na lang, face-to-face classes, what are we seeing with our children, with students? What's the data looking like, and how are we monitoring the situation after the return to face-to-face classes?
Well, ang nakikita namin ngayon sa face-to-face, we would have expected na mga matataas na kaso. There are cases pero hindi siya ganun kataas and these are really manageable. And I think malaking bagay ang face-to-face classes ngayon dahil dito natin nakikita kung paano natin tuturuan ang mga bata sa proper way of preventing COVID, getting COVID. Isa dyan yung pagsuot nila ng face mask, paghugas ng kamay, at yung mga proper information in terms of mga etiquette. So I think it's a good thing with the face-to-face. Hindi ganun kataas ang mga kaso na nakikita natin. But again, we need to be vigilant dahil mga bata at saka nandito pa rin ang risk of transmission. And then we need to educate the children. Yung hindi pa nabakunahan, kailangan pa rin natin i-encourage na ang mga nanay na pabakunahan ang mga bata.
Okay, Dr. Ron Jean Solante. Sir, maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
We're starting up another conversation right after the break. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back. Fake news, as you already know, is a problem in the country, but what can we do about it? We hear the insights of Attorney Rico Domingo. He is chairman of the Movement Against Disinformation and the immediate past president of the Philippine Bar Association. Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Chiefs.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to be here.
Opo, and thank you for being here. Obviously, everybody's aware of the latest survey showing that, I mean, there's no disagreement here. Parang everybody is aware of it. Everybody's afraid of it. Certainly, media, us, kami, we've been dealing with this for a long time, but I mean, let's get right into it. What can we do if there's anything we can do?
Maraming tayong magagawa. Tuwing may maririnig tayong kasinungalingan, we hear a lot of fake news proliferated in the social media platforms. Bigyan natin ng let's provide the what is truthful and what is correct. So every time we encounter any fake news, then we have to come out with a counterpart, truth or truthful news.
Pero yun nga, sir, di ba? Parang there are studies also showing that even fact-checking efforts are really quite futile in effect after the fake news comes out, after it goes viral. The fact-check never really catches up, less than 10% in most cases. And the effort, and certainly people have had their personal experiences of trying to correct, of trying to offer what they know to be more factual, but voila, and the numbers seem to bear it out. The studies seem to bear it out that even fact-checking doesn't work.
That's true. Roby, ikaw, no? You're Roby?
Apa.
Oh, taga-UPI tayong pareho.
Apa.
Yes, that's true. But again, it has to be well crafted. The strategy has to be well crafted. And a basic component of this strategy would be the cooperation of the major platforms, social media platforms. There should be a very thorough and stringent self-regulating mechanism, just like what they did in Germany. They're enacting a law that would be strictly a vision of what would be truthful news item. For example, in the latest Pulse Asia survey, you can see that the influencers are the ones who are really the culprit here. No, the 58% of the respondents in the survey said that the culprit would be the social media, no? So the internet providers. So we have to train our regulatory, not in the governmental portion, but more of the self-regulatory strategy on the social media platforms. Otherwise, sabi nga nila, after 6 hours, everything will be all around the world, no? So any fake news would just be spread in 6 hours, and it's all over the world. So we need that really to have the social media platforms cooperate with us. And they have self-regulation, and they have what you call a code of conduct. So we have to make sure that they are comply with their own self-regulatory measures.
Well, apart from self-regulation, kailangan din siguro ng legislation, ano? And the 19th Congress is crafting. Well, they're trying to craft a law to regulate social media, impose etiquette. What do you want to see in those rules? Kung sakali mang mapasaya.
Hello, Ami, I'm very, very cautious about legislative measures because legislation can be used as a propaganda vehicle by the regulators, no? And we have a very concerned and serious concern about that regulatory measures. So what we intend to do is to simply come up with self-regulation and let us put the social media platforms on the spot on this because they are here. For example, they're here in our country. They're practically not regulated for the simple reason that they're not even incorporated as entities in the Philippines. No, they don't have SEC regulations. No. So we need to be able to track their efforts, their activities in the social media here, particularly when they try to promote fake news or fake items for purposes of revenue generating activities, no? Because they're the ones who benefited for it and to the risk of the truthful dissemination of news in the country.
Can you give an example or an illustration of self-regulation? Parang napaka-complicated eh.
It looks complicated, but if you're going to really put the social media platforms on the spot and come out and review the self-regulation measures in keeping with our desire to have only the truthful news on the postings, then it will not be that much. The only problem right now is that they are self-regulating for their own sake, for their own revenue generating set. And they have actually a veto power, or they have a power to remove or delete. For example, before the elections, we've been trying, the movement against disinformation have been trying to have certain matters deleted because they're not truthful. It took them after the elections to delete them, about 1 million or 2 million of them. So it took them quite a while to immediately react to complaints of fake news and similar news. So they have to be more proactive in this. And that's the reason why there is a proliferation of fake news right now.
You mentioned a German model. I wanted to clarify that kanina, because on the one hand, I think you mentioned a legislation in Germany, but at the same time, I don't know if you corrected it, but you did steer the conversation to self-regulation. What exactly is the model in Germany?
The German model would somehow put the social media platforms on a mode, on a medium, whereby there would be a very stringent self-regulation mode. In other words, the government will not tell them what to do, but there will be some built-in measures that would tell the regulators that they are not doing what ought to be done under the act.
So it's strictly monitoring. I mean, what compels them to self-regulate?
Because they will be removed from the territory, from their jurisdiction, if they do not comply with the self-regulation measures.
Okay, and they don't.
They will not be allowed. They will not be licensed. They will not be extended licensed.
And
so mawawala sila doon. They'll be out of the jurisdiction and they cannot do business there.
Okay, and that doesn't take legislation. It's purely simple business operation being. Di ba?
The German government decided to put it in a legislation, and they have to craft that legislation very, very carefully, such that it will not impinge on the freedom of the press and freedom of expression.
So in the case of social media platforms, as you said, here in the Philippines, where as you said, some of them are not even registered as companies. Here, a first step will be what? To require registration?
Well, if they are doing business in the country, which they are doing right now by way of the definition doing business, then they should register themselves in the SEC so that they'll be answerable to whatever cause of action or whatever litigation they would be facing in this jurisdiction.
So you're thinking mostly on regulation, no? Hindi legislation. And regulation can be done purely by the executive. Yun ba yung iniisip ninyo?
When I say regulation, we're talking about the social media platforms themselves, like Meta, YouTube,
Twitter,
Facebook. All of them should have some regulatory mesh within their particular, and that will be required of them to present to whoever would be monitoring their activities. There'll be pure transparency, and that would be supposed to be observed by the social media platforms as their benchmark for their compliance with not being able to proliferate or disseminate fake news on the social media.
So
in that
anong
case,
consequences sa kanila? Kasi I understand TikTok Philippines is doing that eh. They've hired more people. Ang dami-dami na daw nilang nadagdag na tao to monitor. Nahihirapan pa rin sila actually. Anong consequences kung yung giant media platforms na yan, tuloy-tuloy pa rin, whether deliberately or by omission or negligence, tuloy-tuloy pa rin kumakalat yung fake news.
So,
anong consequences sa kanila kung walang batas?
Kung walang batas, there'll be private parties who would be running after them. For example, in a libel suit situation or in a tort law situation, and not necessarily because the government is compelling them to do that, but the private parties who are affected and adversely prejudiced by what they allow to be proliferating as fake news in their social media platforms, they'll be the ones to be answerable for that. There are other remedies available in our law rather than government regulation.
Okay, now, attorney, obviously, masalimuot to, and it takes all the sectors at the very least acknowledging the problem. What are the other sectors? Who are the other stakeholders that have to get engaged other than the platforms themselves for us to have an ecosystem that basically allows us to have an information resilient population?
Well, all the sectors affected, for example, the traditional media will have to be in the loop on this. The radio and television industry should be in the loop on this. All the media vehicles, the mass media as they are defined in our system, should all be there, cooperating in trying to clean up the social media platform and environment.
No, but
Makakasama yan. Particularly, of course, the self-regulating KBP. For example, the NTC has to be there as well.
yeah, but but other than media, who else do we need to address? Whether addressing them as part of the problem or as potential allies, or maybe even both. Because as the Pulse Asia survey points out, di ba? Parang given yung problema sa media, but they're also pointing out that a lot of the problem is not even the traditional media as we see them. Influencers, content creators who do not necessarily see themselves as media. How do we address those sectors as well? And for that matter, I'll throw it out there as well, our education system.
Yeah, it has to be a very comprehensive strategy on this that will involve all the people who are in the media. In other words, what we are trying to hit here is for everyone to cooperate in trying to disseminate only truthful information on the social media platforms. No? Kasama na dyan ang education, the judicial system has to be there, the PNP has to be there, the NBI has to be there. All the pillars of justice have to be included in this particular effort. So you cannot just do it by just simply zeroing on the social media platforms. All the other government agencies as well as NGOs and the community should be together in trying to address this proliferation of fake media.
Okay, speaking of information dissemination, how would you assess the way the new government is disseminating news about the presidency, for example? Our president is maintaining his own vlog. He's still mostly avoiding the local media. What's your assessment?
Well, I think it's important in good governance to be transparent. In other words, you should be able to tell the people what you're doing as the governor. You know? So in other words, you have to be able to disseminate exactly what your platforms are, what your government and the agencies are doing, and what you intend to do in the near future. For example, there has been an assessment for the first 100 days. Then they should be able to come out with a truthful account of the 100 days, and subject to, of course, comments and truthful and good faith comments from the public who would be listening to public report of such alleged achievements during the 100 days. So, in other words, let us not try to divide the press. In other words, all the members of the press should be allowed to freely report what they have seen, whether it is critical or something that would be approval of the activities of the administration. In other words, there should not be any regulatory measures that would somehow impede the free flow of information between the public and the government.
Okay, Attorney Rico Domingo of the Movement Against Disinformation. Sir, maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat din po. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ami.
And we'll bring in our last guest for the evening, COMELEC spokesperson Rex Laudianco. Welcome back to the Chiefs. Sir.
Magandang gabi po, Sir Roby. Good evening, Mami. Magandang gabi po sa ating kapakinig.
Sir, so nangyari na. Pinirmahan na po ni President Marcos postponing the barangay and SK elections to next year. What happens now?
Yes, sir. As committed before by the COMELEC, all of the ballots printed, all of the goods and supplies procured will be kept in storage po and under our security. This will be put into use later in the year po in the resetting of the barangay elections on the last Monday of October 2023, and that's October 30 po, 2023. Wala pong masasayang dito, including the ballot na na-print na po namin because all of these are accounted for and a simple resolution by the Commission and Bank will allow and authorize its use for the 2023 elections.
Sir, hindi po ako namimiloso po, but what is our guarantee na hindi yan mapopostpone next year?
Of course, we have to admit po that the power really to set the term of the barangay officials really rests in the legislative and executive departments of the government po. Talaga pong nandun yan under Article 10 of the Constitution. And we are really hoping, sir, that based on the hearings, based on the commitments of our lawmakers, that this will be the last postponement insofar as the term of this current of barangay officials are concerned.
This will be the last as of this moment. Anyway, matutuloy pa ba yung voter registration in November? Tuloy pa rin?
Yes, ma'am. Mami, as committed din po by the COMELEC, immediately after the effectivity of this law, the COMELEC will be gearing for the resumption of the continuing registration. In fact, we are slated to schedule the registration perhaps on the last week of November or the first week of December. Magpapadala lamang po kami ng mga election forms and supplies sa lahat po ng offices ng COMELEC in all the cities and municipalities within the Philippines po.
Okay,
sir. Paano yung filing ng certificates of candidacy for the barangayan sanggunian? Kailan na yun i-reset ba yun o tuloy pa rin this year?
We have to reset it po, ma'am, and the COMELEC will be issuing a resolution adjusting all its timelines. Babaguhin na po namin ang calendar of activities namin, resetting all the timelines and the schedules that we have previously set. Ganito naman po ang ginagawa ng COMELEC kapag lumalabas po yung batas postponing a specific election or an electoral exercise.
Sir, so specifically, doon sa mga nag-file for SK, kung by next year, lumampas na yung edad nila, sorry na lang.
Tama po kayo. Unfortunately po, wala pa naman nagpa-file. Pero tama po kayo, ang qualification na po ng ating mga susunod na mga kakandidato ay nababase na sa October 30, 2023. So if on October 30, 2023 ay lampas ka na po ng 24 years old, even for one day, you are not qualified anymore. Doon po kasi unang proposal sa Senate version, nilagay sana yan, but yung sa Bicameral Conference Committee version na umakyat, na naging enrolled bill at pinirmahan ng ating Pangulo, wala na po yan.
Yung ipiprint nyo sana ngayon, 92 million ballots, ano? Ilan na uli yung madadagdag by October? Well, before October next year. Mga ilan na kakailanganin ninyo?
The 92 million ballots po accounts for around 69 to 70 million regular voters and around 24 to 25 million barangay and SK voters. By estimates of the Philippine Statistics Authority po, itutuloy namin registration, yung last quarter po ng 2023, baka umabot tayo sa almost 73 million na regular voters at almost 29 to 30 million barangay voters. Kung sakali man po, kailangan namin magdagdag talaga. That's the very reason why we're pushing for an increase in our budget specifically for 2023.
Saka yung mga tao magbabantay sa polling centers, you will need more people dahil by October, mas marami na kayong i-handle. Ganun ba yun?
That is correct, ma'am. For December 5, 2022 po, sana we have prepared around 198,000 to 207,000 clustered precincts. So that accounts times 3, around 600,000 poll workers. But by around October or the last quarter of 2023, we expect around 239,000 to 240,000 cluster precincts. So lalampas na po tayo halos sa 700,000 poll workers na i-deputize at of course babayaran po ng COMELEC.
Sir, during the debates and the discussions on whether or not to postpone yet again, I mean, just to remind for people who don't know, third time na tong na postpone. But during the discussions for this particular postponement, again, a lot of ideas, a lot of suggestions from legislators, some saying maybe reconfigure natin yung barangay, some saying let's do away with the SK election, some saying let's just have a youth representative. Whatever it is, what are the chances na masingitan pa to before the coming elections na that there be a law passed to actually take up some of these proposals? And then again, going back to my original question, what impact will this have on our certainty of having barangay SK elections next year?
That is correct, sir. Really, we are really witnesses to the debates in the Senate and the House floors po regarding, one, yung terms of offices po nila. Because the argument there was lagi naman po na-postpone. Supposedly, the 3-year term keeps on being extended. So isa po yan sa naging argument nila na dapat palawigin na yung kanilang termino for perhaps a longer year. But the counter-argument there is that yung local positions natin, mayor, councilors, the governors, 3 years lamang po sila, including the congressmen. So these are the arguments and counter-arguments on that. But then again, we have to accept the fact that this is entirely a political question that will be decided by the legislative and the executive department.
Yeah.
So ganun po talaga, sir. We have to respect that. But as of now, the Public Act 11462 is the law, and it says that the 3-year term will commence from November 30, 2023. Yung election po nila ay October 30. The term will begin on November 30, 2023, and it will last for 3 years thereafter.
Okay. On a political question, therefore, what are the implications of, I mean, if by the time we hold it next year, diba, 2023, that's fine, umabot na tayo doon. But as many guests have pointed out when they spoke with us here on this topic, they keep reminding that, alam nyo, yung pag-timing ng mga eleksyon na, you know, every 6 years for the Senate, every 6 years for President, 3 years ang congressman, 3 years ang mayor, and then the fixed terms for the and then iba-iba yung schedule niyan. Originally, sabi, the framers had a real reason for distributing the schedule, for overlapping terms, and so on. By the time we get to barangay elections next year, notwithstanding this being the lowest rung for our government, what implication will that have for the original design to have these differently scheduled terms?
Yeah. Going into the Constitution, sir, if we're looking at the intent really was to synchronize the national and local elections. Lagi nga po sinasabi, included there, yung second Monday of May. Kung titignan po natin, in so far as the barangay election is concerned, hindi po siya kasama doon. Because specifically, the Constitution provided that it will be the laws enacted thereafter which will set the term of these barangay and SK officials. Yes, there are times po na nagpang-abot within the same year yung barangay and SK elections sa national and local elections. But also in the past din po, meron nangyayari po at mas madalas po na nangyayari na naglalaktaw po at hindi nagkakasabay yung national and local positions with that the barangay and SK elections. So far po, wala naman po kaming nakikitang very significant impact dito. In fact nga po, itong nakaraan natin, kung tutuusin sana, this 2022 elections, ikalawang pagkakataon po yata ito na magkakasabay. But then again, the law came out, hindi naman po namin nakita ng mga nakarang halala na magkahiwalay sila ng taon na nagkaroon ng significant impact dito sa ating governance po.
But there must be at least one very real implication by having effectively doubled the term for these barangay officials, and that is that by the time we get to the elections, they and the incumbent local officials, namely the mayors and the congressmen, by this time you would assume are quite familiar with each other.
That is correct, sir. Going into the reason for Republic Act 11462, ang sinabi naman po ng ating mga babatas is that the reason for the postponement, the reason for the extension of the term is that they lost practically 2.5 years due to the pandemic. So ito po yung sinasabi nilang primary reason why they need to issue this law postponing the election. So yun naman po yung tinitignan namin dito. Yes, lagi naman po ganyan yung sistema. But then again, going into the sphere of governance natin po dito sa Pilipinas, lagi naman po talagang allied yung local government with that of the barangay and the smallest unit of governance. So hopefully, sir, this will work out for the good of the Philippines, and we trust the legislative and the executive departments when it comes to the political decisions.
Ano kaya yung loss doon when they were the frontliners in the pandemic response, ano? But anyway, we all agree naman that this thing is a political question. Wala bang balak ang COMELEC na mag-suggest ng legislation kahit suntok sa buwan to ask our lawmakers na mag-pass ng law na wag nang magpo-postpone unless siguro natural calamity, natural disaster ang tumama. Just to ensure the regularity of our elections, hindi ba? Isn't that the essence of democratic representation?
Tama naman po, Ma'am Ami. Really, the fixing of the elections, yung particular intervals set under law, stabilizes democracy and governance. Tama naman po yan. Because the people themselves could see when the elections will happen at hindi po sila nagbabago or nangangamba na may iba. But then again, lagi nga po namin sinasabi, these really are political questions. Kung sakali man pong tatanungin ng COMELEC, ito rin naman po yung magiging sagot namin. Sasabihin po namin sa ating Kongreso na we see stability in fixing the dates of the elections at regular intervals as set by law, but we also see and respect the power of the executive and legislative departments of our government to set this date po.
Okay, Mr. Laudianco, maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Thank you so much po, sir. And ma'am, magandang gabi po. Maraming salamat. Mabuhay mo.
Magandang gabi po sa inyo. Rex Laudianco, spokesperson po for the Commission on Elections. And that is it for the Chiefs. We hope it was discussed. We'll keep the conversation going. I'm Roby Alampay.
I'm Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.